So I once got a call from a school in Philadelphia. The voice on the other end sounded urgent. They were describing the student who was uncontrollable. They had painted a picture of a monster. They said 1 minute he's fun, the next he's a whirlwind of violence. He's flipping desks. He's disturbing the peace in the classroom. You know how I go. And so by the time that I arrived, security had already restrained him, escorted him out of the classroom, and put him in a small library room. Now, when I stepped into this space that's typically designed for the quiet pursuit of knowledge, this space felt different. He was quiet, sitting in the corner, head down, shoulders dropped, and his body was folded inward as if he was trying to disappear into that chair. And man, I'll never forget how quiet he was. It was that haunting, hollow quiet a body stops from exhaustion after it's done fighting for his life. See, somehow my number ends up on a principal's desk, and no, I wasn't the one in trouble. But at that time, I was a young, passionate social change agent with a former title of a therapist. But they called me because they wanted me to figure out why he did what he did so that they could justify their choice of punishment. But as I sat and watched a boy who had been restrained by grown men discarded into a room, and I listened to him, I learned something different. See, the night before, Malik didn't walk into a home. He walked into a wall of sound. His mother's screams, the heavy, rhythmic thud of her feet against wood as she stumbles towards the bedroom. He sees her, drops everything, sweeps them up, puts them into a closet. Now, I need y'all to see this. He white knuckled to that doorknob and he pulling back with everything he got, and his mom is behind him. On the other side of that door was mom's drunk, violent boyfriend, and he was violently rattling that knob. And so Malik stays there, being a human lock all night until the sun comes up. So when the classroom doorknob rattled the next morning, his brain didn't perceive some kids playing in the hallway. And his body didn't sense a classroom, it sensed a closet. And somewhere in between his behavior and the end of the day, something shifted. Because what the school had called defiance was actually a neurological and biological protective mechanism. But he was no longer seen as a child in pain. He was seen as something that needed to be managed. And by the end of the day, he was a file. And y'all know the file I'm talking about, filled with labels. Behavior problem, attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, angry, violent, explosive, aggressive, non-compliant. Labels that will follow him longer than the sound of that doorknob. And see, after Malik, I started getting called into all types of rooms and spaces, boards of education, precinct offices, executive suites, all where the tough decisions were being made. But let me tell y'all something. The rooms were changing, but the systems wasn't. And so while we in these rooms, they all thought that we were looking at a behavior problem. And they trying to figure out, how do we fix this individual, when they should have been trying to figure out, how do we fix the system? Because they didn't realize that the same fire that they were trying to put out was being fueled by the very walls that we were sitting in. And so I started to recognize a familiar, haunting script. I'm in different organizations, different buildings, different staff, but the same moment kept appearing. The same conversations, the same meetings about a problematic individual. And I watched as files got thicker and understanding got thinner. And eventually labels take on different clothes. Not leadership material. Not the right culture fit. Disengaged. You got an attitude problem. Flight risk. Or in this case, aggressive, violent. And I began to feel like I was standing next to a revolving door that just wouldn't stop spinning. as I'm watching trauma walk in, get suited, I meant labeled, and pushed right back out. Because in our systems, there's a ritual way to how we fail. A moment happens, meaning gets assigned, a permanent record is created, and it left me with a question that I just couldn't shake. Why do our systems keep punishing survival? And so, as the builder that I am, I took to research. And one study in particular that stood out to me was one done by a UC Berkeley professor by the name of Sean Darlan Hammond in a US Department of Education by the name of Eric Ho. And the title to their research was, no matter how you slice it, Black kids are punished more. And what they looked at was 1,500 measures of school discipline disparities. And they found that Black kids were consistently overrepresented. And so I kept doing research, kept analyzing data. And when the disparities remain, no matter how I look at the data, I began to realize I'm asking the wrong question. Because it's no longer what happened to you. Y'all know that question they ask now. It's no longer what happened to you. It's what's happening around these individuals. What's happening around our children and our people. Because what I thought was a random phone call about a rare case, I started to understand that these labels wasn't just describing anymore. They were somehow explaining and then shaping identities. And so I realized Malik wasn't rare. He was a pattern, predictable result of systems we refuse to change. And if I already wasn't uncomfortable, I became even more uncomfortable because I kept digging. And once I changed my question, I realized something that changed the way I practice for the rest of my life. I realized that systems do not just manage behavior, they manufacture it. Our institutions look at the surface, they see a root, call it a cause, that's that. But what if behavior isn't the problem? What if behavior is the receipt? It's the proof that shows up in an exit interview, in a performance review. Or in this case, it's the proof of a transaction that happened long before that desk hit the floor. Because in that classroom, Malik had a nervous system screaming danger, but they handed him a disciplinary file. And that's when it hit me. Systems name exactly what they produce. And so the more I started looking at our institutions and the architecture of our institutions, this diagram kept appearing. So I kind of created a framework. So stay with me, y'all. Imagine this triangle where you got systems at the top, the word system at the top. On one side, you got this phrase called embodied contradiction. And on the other side, you have category. Now, systems are what we all know them to be: policies, practices, the way that we always done it. And there's arrows in between each to communicate or to hint at some sort of feedback loop. Once you get down to embodied contradiction, this is where it gets interesting. Because embodied contradiction highlights where in your system that you need to change. So a system has two hands, just look at it that way. One hand has the stated values. I know what these are. It's some buzzwords. We value belonging. We trauma informed. Y'all know those words, right? Those big buzzwords. And then the structural demands of a system, which is the other hand, says this. We trauma informed, but we're going to restrain him and discard him into a room by itself. We value belonging, stated values. Structural demands say, got 3 strikes and you out of here. And so you see the tension that creates, right? That's a natural tension, but it's what I'm calling embodied contradiction because the tension has to go somewhere. And that's how the behavior becomes the receipt. Then you move over to category. Now, category serves no purpose other than to justify the existence of the system. And if the system can't justify itself, it'll manufacture a problem, even if it's out of a child's trauma response. And then it'll use that data to justify its next move. And when data can demonstrate a pipeline from school to prison, it isn't predicting futures. It's reporting on its own performance. That morning in Philadelphia, a moment happened, an embodied contradiction. A classroom had gone silent, and the system had to figure out what that silent meant. Was it defiance or was it distress? Was it disrespect or was he really in danger? In that split second, the system does what it always does. It assigns the category, prints the receipt, and files it away. Systems don't change just because we rewrite our mission statement. And real transformation don't come because we adjusted our policy manual. It happens in the architecture of our response. When a leader stops trying to fix an individual and start trying to redesign the system around that individual. Malik was just a boy in pain who walked into a school system that was designed to fail him. We don't need more resilience. We need better architecture. Because when you design the system to account for the human, you don't just decide who gets labeled, you decide who gets seen. Much love.